Well, this week, Donald Trump heads into a critical meeting with China, but he's weakened and he's overextended, and he's still stuck in a war in Iran that's actively reshaping global power away from Washington. This is a war that's now stretching into its 11th week with no clear end in sight as it drains American resources and strains diplomatic ties just 2 days before this high-stakes meeting with China, our biggest adversary. For generations, Americans understood the presidency carried a unique responsibility in moments of international crisis, not just to command the military, but to clearly explain and guide and reassure the public and America's allies that there is a coherent strategy behind the deployment of American power. But as Trump prepares for this upcoming 2-day summit with the leader of China, Xi Jinping, he hasn't done any of that. And it's hurting our standing in the world. And today, on day 72 of Donald Trump's war in Iran, China now sees the United States as a, quote, giant with a limp, end quote. The New York Times reports, quote, to some Chinese military and geopolitical analysts, the war has done more than deplete U.S. munitions stockpiles. It has also shattered America's aura of dominance. They argue that it's exposed a major flaw in U.S. war strategy: its inability to make weapons quickly enough to replenish its arsenal in a sustained, intense conflict. This depletion has significantly diminished the U.S. military's ability to project its combat power, laying bare the shortcomings of its global military hegemony, said Yue Gang, a retired colonel of the People's Liberation Army, in an interview. The Atlantic warns that Washington may be no longer capable of reversing or even controlling the consequences of America losing the war in Iran. Quote, there will be no return to the status quo ante, no ultimate American triumph that will undo or overcome the harm done. The Strait of Hormuz will not be open as it once was. With control of the strait, Iran emerges as the key player in the region and one of the key players in the world. The roles of China and Russia as Iran's allies are strengthened. The role of the United States substantially diminished. Far from demonstrating American prowess, as supporters of the war have repeatedly claimed, the conflict has revealed an America that is unreliable and incapable of finishing what it started. That's going to set off a chain reaction around the world as friends and foes adjust to America's failure. Even if Trump were to carry out his threat to destroy Iran's civilization through more bombing, Iran would still be able to launch many missiles and drones before its regime went down, assuming it did go down. Just a few successful strikes could cripple the region's oil and gas infrastructure for years, if not for decades, throwing the world and the United States into a prolonged economic crisis. Even if Trump wanted to bomb Iran as part of an exit strategy, looking tough as a way of masking his retreat, he can't do that without risking this catastrophe. If this isn't checkmate, it's close, end quote. This isn't checkmate, it's close. Yesterday, Donald Trump rejected Iran's latest peace proposal to end the war, posting, quote, I've just read the response from Iran's so-called representatives. I don't like it. Totally unacceptable. The Washington Post reports, quote, Iran's news outlets indicated that the proposal was similar to Tehran's position during the previous negotiating exchange, calling for an official end to the war, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, withdrawal of all naval vessels enforcing a U.S. blockade, lifting of U.S. sanctions, an effective ceasefire in Lebanon, and an additional 30 days of talks to iron out the details. Iran has proposed that all discussions of its nuclear program be the subject of subsequent negotiations. Today, the Speaker of Iran's parliament had this message for Donald Trump. There is no alternative but to accept the rights of the Iranian people as laid out in the 14-point proposal. Any other approach will be completely inconclusive, nothing but one failure after another. The longer they drag their feet, the more American taxpayers will pay for it. That came after Donald Trump said this about a ceasefire.
I would say the ceasefire is on massive life support, where the doctor walks in and says, sir, your loved one has approximately a 1% chance of living.
During what was supposed to be a maternal health care event in the Oval Office, Donald Trump launched into a meandering and at sometimes surreal monologue after he was asked about this really important upcoming trip to China. Trump began by saying that he has a great relationship with President Xi. Then he went on to call Iranian leaders lunatics before marveling at what he described as the coolness of military operators intercepting missiles within seconds.
We had 111 shot at one of our ships over a very short period of time. Out of 111 missiles going at 3,000 miles an hour, all 111 missiles were knocked down into the ocean long prior to arriving at the target. And the coolest guys are the guys that do this. You know, they're not brawn, they're brain. They sit there, missile shot. You're going to see it happening. Missiles coming. They got like about 13 seconds to make a decision. It's not like, gee, let's figure it out. They make a wrong calculation. You know, you lose a lot of men, and a lot of $1 billion times 10 ships. So, but there's a level of coolness that missile shot, they look, ba, 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 and you know, they're going, heading 47 degrees north, 1,300 feet, going 3,000 miles an hour. Okay, we have it in our sight. Fire, boom. 10 seconds left. Let me tell you, they need smart people. Mm-hmm. These people are smart. Amazing. And they're so smart that they're cool.
To be clear, nobody disputes the extraordinary skill of American service members operating missile defense systems under pressure. But what Americans heard from the president today was not clarity. The lack of clarity from the president of the United States carries consequences. Today, The Atlantic's Vivian Salama writes, quote, in the past, Trump supporters and even many U.S. allies viewed Trump's famous unpredictability as unorthodox, but at times effective, a useful means of wrong-footing opponents or shaking up the tired status quo. Many now see something more unsettling in Trump's international relations, including in the 10-week war. What was once viewed as strategic unpredictability now feels like destabilizing unreliability. Leading off our discussion tonight is the Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State. He's the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, great to see you. Thank you for being with us. Look, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, in saying that America's got to respect the rights of the Iranian people, is a little rich. That is a regime that has denied its own people's rights and was killing its own people, which, by the way, was the best reason, if there was one, of getting involved in trying to help the Iranian people. But we seem to have dropped that off before we even started this war.
Yeah, well, it was never realistic to think that a 4, 5, 6-week bombing campaign was going to cause regime change in Iran. And essentially, that's the bet that Trump made. He felt like a 4, 5, 6-week bombing campaign could fundamentally break the Iranian regime, either topple it completely or render it so weak that it would acquiesce to our demands. Now, a whole long list of experts who had looked at the military options told the president, and had been saying for a long time, that that wouldn't work, that the Iranian regime was dug in very deep, very ideological. They could absorb a lot of pain and still survive. So we knew this was going to be a disaster, and that's the way it turned out. And the way the president talks about it, not helpful. I thought of it, strategic ambiguity is a policy we have in some places. You can think of Trump's as incoherent ambiguity. He just sort of babbles in no particular direction, and it's left us in an incredibly vulnerable and dangerous spot, not just in the Middle East, but in the whole world, given how important the Middle East is to the whole world.
Well, and so let's get back to this China issue. He's going to China in 2 days. They don't have strategic ambiguity at all. They don't wing it in China. You can like China, you can hate China, you can think of them as as our major adversary, but we buy a lot of stuff from them. It's an important relationship that we've got to figure out. They don't do this. I don't know what they must be thinking as they watch Donald Trump flailing all over the place.
Well, I think they've got a great opportunity. And look, this notion that President Trump was doing some sort of weave in the way he talked about 10 different subjects and circled his way back and rambled off in some different direction, that there was some sort of coherent strategy behind that, was always absurd. I mean, the truest thing I've ever heard about this was a quote attributed to Jared Kushner, of all people, that said that his father-in-law looks at the world, when you don't know where you're going, you're always on the right path. Sort of a chaos approach. And that's always been the case. He just reacts. He doesn't have a strategic plan. And as things stumble forward, people say, see, that's what he meant. No, he didn't mean anything. He was just acting from moment to moment. Now we're all paying the price. And China is another big problem. So we overplayed our hand in the Middle East and have now strengthened Iran. from where they were when this war started. They were actually negotiating to get rid of their nuclear program when we foolishly started this war. They are now stronger because they've decided to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage. Similarly, the trade war that Trump has launched against China has exposed our vulnerabilities on critical minerals, on the need to have China buy our soybeans. So he heads into this really important, what is primarily an economic negotiation, in a weakened position because he lashed out with his trade war, again, without thinking where it would actually go. President Trump has weakened us to a substantial degree in the Middle East with China, and now he walks into a summit in that weakened position. And he's not exactly a very capable negotiator. So it is very concerning to see what will come out of this summit.
He's made everybody, China included, but even Canada, where I'm from, think differently about their strategic and trade relationships with the United States. He told John Roberts on Fox, the Fox News correspondent Bill Melugin tweeted out, President Trump tells Fox News colleagues John Roberts in a phone call just now he's seriously considering making Venezuela the 51st U.S. state, adding that there's $40 trillion in oil there and Venezuela loves Trump. It's deeply unserious. And this is part of the problem, that we're living in a very serious world, and he's about to meet our most serious adversary.
Yeah, I've never liked the unserious line because it's idiotic, it's stupid, it's egotistical and narcissistic, but it's deadly serious because it has consequences. The whole rest of the world sees the president as some combination of a tin horn joke dictator or a belligerent bully willing to use U.S. power to coerce anyone he sees fit. I mean, claiming that you're just going to grab the sovereign territory of another country undermines our credibility. And look, this is the most important point. How do we get out of this Iran situation?
Yes.
The only way out of it is to negotiate, to actually work with. There's some 50 countries that have now coalesced around the UK and France to say, hey, opening the strait is enormously important to us. We want to be part of this. Trump has pushed them all away in favor of unilateral action, in favor of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff negotiating a deal. We need allies and partners. We need the rest of the world. And he's pushed them all away. And claiming that the U.S. is going to grab the sovereign territory of Venezuela just pushes further people away. We need to be bringing partners and allies together to help us out of this very, very deep hole that Donald Trump has dug for us. And yet he continues to take the opposite approach because he's flailing all over the place, again, in an incoherent manner.
It's very different than how we got into the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. It was about 2 or 3 years of very intense American negotiation after several years of other parties negotiating, America bringing in some very, very targeted economic sanctions. That was a very well thought out, long-term, hard-fought victory that Donald Trump pulled us out for. It wasn't Witkoff and Kushner hanging around and hoping somebody will meet them in Pakistan.
And it worked. Iran stopped moving towards a nuclear weapon. And that's the crucial part of this. Fareed Zakaria actually had a very good column on this about a week ago, that the U.S. has sometimes been trapped between the idea that we've got to deal with Iran, and wouldn't it be better if Iran was gone? And the thing is, you can't sort of walk down that fence. You can't say we're going to negotiate them, we're going to contain them, and then we're going to sort of cross our fingers and hope that the regime disappears. President Obama was the first president to recognize that and say, no, I don't like negotiating with these people. They murder their own people. They support terrorism. They are trying to build a nuclear weapon. They're destabilizing a half dozen countries in the Middle East. But I don't have a military option for eliminating them, which means I have to deal with them. And that's what he did. Trump went back to engaging in the fantasy that there was some military option to eliminate Iran, and it has put us in a much weaker position.
Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. The Congressman Adam Smith is a ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. We always appreciate your time. All right, coming up, from his illegal tariffs to his war in Iran, Donald Trump's failures have weakened the United States economy days before this high-stakes meeting with China, which is largely all about the American economy. The art of losing to China. That's next with the Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. Okay, as we said, Donald Trump heads to China this week. It's a big deal. It's a country whose standing in the world is growing while America's is slipping. Trump's war in Iran has not only succeeded in giving Iran a brand new weapon, the Strait of Hormuz, but it's further weakened America's economy and this nation's position in the world, much of which is to China's benefit. Today, Trump said losing a vital free global shipping artery in the Strait of Hormuz was, quote, genius, because now countries are buying oil from Texas. Here's today's local news headline from Temple, Texas. Gas prices across Texas surge across Texas as oil prices rise. Gas prices in Texas, by the way, are over $4 a gallon, slightly lower than the national average, $4.52 a gallon. Today, Donald Trump said he wants to suspend the federal gas tax, which is just over 18 cents a gallon. Now, if you attended the second grade and learned basic arithmetic, not Trump math, you'd know today, even without the federal gas tax, the national average for a gallon of gas would be $4.34 a gallon. What Americans need from Donald Trump is for him to stop doing the stupid thing that sent gas prices surging from under $3 a gallon, which is where they were before Donald Trump decided to go to war with Iran. Then there's what we call the soft power side of things. Voters, not normally somewhere we quote from, but Voters reports, as the U.S. bleeds visitors, China closes in on the top tourism spot. According to a new assessment by the World Travel and Tourism Council, 80 million more people traveled internationally in 2025 compared to 2024. That was a bumper year for global travel. However, the U.S. didn't benefit from that increase. Visitor numbers to the United States dropped by 5.5%. America lost tourists. International spending fell to $176 billion from $184 billion. In contrast, China is gaining ground. In 2025, international visitors spending there rose 10.5% to $135 billion. The report notes that China, the world's second largest tourism market, is closing the gap. The report cites tariffs, profiling by ICE and Border Patrol, anti-LGBTQ sentiment, and social media surveillance, all Trump policies, as reasons for the drop in tourism to the United States. Now, to be entirely fair, you get most of that stuff in China, too. But America used to be the land of the free. The biggest attraction to people from my home country, Canada, there's been a huge drop in Canadian tourism because Canadians are angry that Donald Trump tariffed them and repeatedly threatened their sovereignty, although now he's talking about making Venezuela the 51st state, not Canada. And thanks to Donald Trump's war on American universities and federal institutions, China is also winning on that front. The Association of American Universities reported on March 31st, it's official, China tops the U.S. in research and development spending. 3 days later, Donald Trump released his 2027 budget. White House once again proposes massive cuts to scientific research and education. In other words, China eats our lunch, and Donald Trump says, "Here, sirs, please have some more." That is the art of losing to China. The Financial Times sums up how Trump's failures will follow him to China. It says, quote, Donald Trump travels to Beijing this week against the backdrop of two wars that have gone wrong. The real war that he launched against Iran in February and the trade war against China that he dramatically intensified in April of 2025. Trump's strategic position has been further weakened by the fiasco of the Iran war. The U.S. president was originally scheduled to travel to Beijing in mid-April. He delayed the trip, apparently hoping to get the conflict with Iran wrapped up before he met Xi. Instead, he'll arrive in China with the Strait of Hormuz still effectively closed and fuming about the United States' inability to bend Iran to its will. But the Financial Times notes that there's more to China's advantage than just Trump's mess-ups. The U.S. president's trademark bravado will be used to obscure the weakness of his position. The reality, however, is that Xi Jinping, who, quote, has all the cards, to use a phrase that Trump likes, the Chinese president's ace is his country's near monopoly over the production of rare earth minerals and critical minerals that are crucial to the functioning of American industry. Joining us now is the Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He's the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the Ways and Means Committee. He's here in person. Nice to see you.
Great to be here in person.
Let's talk about gas prices. They're up a lot. There was no surprise in that at all, because in the early days of the war, we saw the price of oil going up 50%, and 100% of the time, the price of gas tracks the price of oil. So now we've got oil up 50%. You did suggest dropping the gas tax, about 18 cents a gallon, which will help, but stopping the war would be even better.
Yeah, I did not expect today, Ali, that I would have, as an endorser of my bill, Donald Trump. But sure enough, he came out for something that I introduced a month ago, which would be a suspension of the federal gas tax, which is only 18.4 cents per gallon. And it would be suspended anytime we go north of $3.99 a gallon on the national average. The second part of my bill, though, I doubt Donald Trump and Republicans will like much, and that is the lost revenue that is supposed to go to the National Highway Trust Fund would be made up by a dollar-for-dollar drop in terms of the oil subsidies that are contained in Trump's one big
Because the
beautiful
gas
bill.
tax is not for nothing. It
Correct.
does
It
actually
goes-
pay for our highways.
And that's the second point
Yeah.
that Donald Trump left out. All of the money that goes from the federal gas tax goes to a National Highway Trust Fund. We can't underfund that because we'll actually pay more down the line. But the bottom line is Donald Trump is attempting to partially put out the fire that he caused.
Right.
Gas prices were $2.98 a gallon on average on February 28th, right before the beginning of this completely unnecessary Iranian war. So yes, suspend the gas tax. It'll help, but as you pointed out, the math, it'll only help a little bit.
So you say when gas prices go above $3.99. I've often thought and have heard and have read that $4 is like a psychological thing. People start to change their behavior at $4. I've talked to a few people who've said they've bought an electric car, something they, everybody toys with but can't, and you have to have money, disposable income, to actually be able to do that right now. But people change their behavior. They start to carpool. They try to use public transit. That works in some parts of the country. It doesn't work everywhere. Everybody can't change their behavior.
Yeah, and in a place like the district I represent in Philadelphia, we have
Yeah.
a great mass transit system. I'm biased. My dad used to work for it. SEPTA, you have a great one here. But as we know, in a large swath of the country, there
doesn't
is
really
no
exist,
mass
yeah.
transit as an option. So it becomes a very difficult thing based on region. But again, the bottom line is this is an entirely self-inflicted wound for
Right.
the United States because of this asinine war that is absolutely achieving nothing. In fact, right now, the status, if we could return to what the status quo was 2.5 months ago, that would seem like a big victory because it would mean the Strait of Hormuz is back open.
And they'll call that a victory, even though it's
absolutely.
been open for all of history. This interesting statistic about tourism.
Yeah.
This is a gimme. Like, countries in the world all want more tourists, right? This was the thing America had that was amazing. People said, I'll go to America because I can be safe and it's a great place and terrific things happen. We dropped in tourist dollars in 2025. Where the world surged, there was much more traveling in 2025 than there was in 2024. We lost on that front. And much of it, like I said, I know my Canadian friends and family who are not interested in coming to the United States right now. Not only because they don't like the policy positions, they're a little scared.
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been some celebrated examples of tourists, including one that got a lot of attention both in Canada and the UK, of an English woman, retiree in her late 60s, ended up in an ICE detention facility. For months. Those sort of stories have given us a black eye throughout the world. I have to tell you, not to compound this bad news with even worse, we're hosting the World Cup that will be starting pretty shortly. Philadelphia is one of the host cities. Also hosting all of the America 250th celebrations. Right now, the early indications are that we're getting nowhere near the number of tourists internationally that we were anticipating. I do fear this could be a great flop, which of course would have such a detrimental effect on our economy.
Something closer to what you handle in your work on the Budget Committee, spending. This concept of China has been creeping up on us in terms of research spending. They've been doing that. Their universities are excellent. Our universities are excellent. They're the best in the world. But we've pulled back on something that is probably the single best taxpayer return on investment, right? When you fund a university or health studies or National Institutes of Health Studies, there's no better use of your tax money. We've been pulling back on that.
That's exactly right. And this goes back to the Doge effort combined with Russell Vogt. I like to say the most dangerous man in America that most Americans have never heard of.
Yep.
The head of the OMB, the principal author of Project 2025. All of that was laid out in Trump's Project 2025. So I think that, unfortunately, we are going to be paying for this pullback in investment in cancer research and vaccine research and a number of areas in the sciences. I think we're going to be paying for it for a long time, both in dollars and cents, but also the cures that are not being discovered right now.
You won't even know. You won't know in 25 years when you go to a doctor and they say you've got something and we don't have a cure. You don't know that cure might have been there.
If it were 1960 and Jonas Salk had not gone down the route he did, you wouldn't necessarily know that, we would have had a vaccine for polio if this doctor from Pittsburgh, Jonas Salk, was actually active and studying this area.
Nice to see you in person. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
Pennsylvania Congressman Brendan Boyle is the ranking member on the House Budget Committee. All right, coming up, the redistricting fight is heating up as Republicans are scrambling to gerrymander more Republican seats ahead of what could be a brutal midterm election. A Ron DeSantis effort to redraw Florida's congressional maps is now being challenged in court. Norm Eisen, who organized and helped file that lawsuit, joins me next. There are several big developments in the redistricting arms race single-handedly started by Donald Trump, a president who, we'll remind you, has a 62% disapproval rating, who is desperate to stop Democrats from winning control of Congress in November and gaining subpoena power. Today, the Associated Press reports that Democrats in Virginia, quote, filed an emergency appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court seeking to halt a Virginia ruling invalidating a ballot measure that would have given their party an additional 4 winnable U.S. House seats, end quote. And now another major redistricting battle is unfolding in Florida. Several voting rights organizations, including the Democracy Defenders Fund and the League of Women Voters of Florida, are suing the Republican Governor Ron DeSantis over what they describe as an unconstitutional partisan gerrymander. The plaintiffs argue in the lawsuit, quote, Governor DeSantis orchestrated an unprecedented special session to force through a new congressional redistricting plan in the middle of a decade. The plan is illegal. It is a flagrant violation of the express will of the people of Florida, who amended their constitution just over 15 years ago to ban precisely the intent that is at the heart of the plan. Governor DeSantis redrew Florida's congressional districting with a plan with the goal of increasing the number of Republican seats to 24 of Florida's 28 congressional districts, while undermining Black and Latino voting strength across the state. The plan targets the remaining 4 seats currently held by Democratic representatives, seeking to disfavor their incumbents and favor the Republican Party by systematically dismantling these Democratic-leaning districts. All right, Norm Eisen, whose organization helped file that lawsuit and who will join us in just a moment, summed it up this way on social media. 60% plus of Florida voters banned partisan gerrymandering in 2010. This map defies voters' will. We're asking the court to strike it down. And this fight is not just fueling political tension in state capitals and courtrooms. According to the Associated Press, it's also creating confusion and chaos. Republicans rushed to gerrymander congressional districts across several southern states after a U.S. Supreme Court ruling hollowed out the Voting Rights Act, is confusing voters and creating logistical headaches for local election officials. Thousands of Louisiana voters have already cast early ballots for congressional candidates in what could be the wrong district. Alabama's primaries are a week away, but the state could force a do-over for voting on U.S. House races. A new congressional map in Tennessee upended races that had been underway for months. Michael McClanahan, the NAACP's Louisiana State Conference president, is hearing total confusion as voters call him and ask, is there an election? Anisha Hardy, executive director of Alabama Values, which provides support to voting and civil rights groups, said, once people stop believing that the process is stable and fair, disengagement is going to increase. And that's one of the biggest dangers here. And Democrats in Congress are now making clear that they plan to fight these efforts aggressively. This morning, the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, said even after being aided and abetted by blatantly undemocratic court decisions, the failed GOP majority will not be able to gerrymander themselves back into power. Democrats will take control of the House of Representatives in November. And in Florida, that's exactly what Republicans are trying to do, gerrymander themselves back into power. But folks like our next guest are working to put a stop to it. Joining us now is Norm Eisen, co-founder and executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund. He's the former ethics chief in the Obama White House and the co-founder of The Contrarian. Norm, great to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me back.
We've been talking for so long about so many things, but this one is now, I think, the biggest fire that we're facing, because it doesn't matter what your positions are on anything else, climate, healthcare, immigration. What matters is your agency is being removed, not necessarily your vote. Because the same number of people maybe will still be able to vote, but your agency, the weight and value of your vote is being diminished.
And the ability to express your choices when we're packing and cracking these congressional districts. And the down ballot, Ali, it's not just the federal Congress, it's state legislatures and so many down ballot issues. But the good news is that there actually are laws in place. So in Florida, my organization, working with a wonderful coalition and group of clients, noticed under Florida law, the Florida Constitution, you're not allowed to do a partisan gerrymander. And it's so striking. Governor DeSantis and his allies, perhaps taking a cue from Donald Trump's book, don't care what the law says. They're determined to ram it through anyhow. So we've gone to court. We're going to seek emergency relief. And we're going to put a stop to this. It's important in its own right, but also because it's one of dozens of actions like it around the South and around the country to fight back and encourage voters, hey, we're fighting for you to be able to cast a vote that counts.
So, Norm, for a long time, you have been saying, literally over a decade, you've been saying you have to fight the things that are wrong, because when you let the little things go, bigger things happen. And that's kind of where we are here, right? There are a lot of people who don't go out and vote in their state legislatures, but the state legislatures are the ones that are making these decisions. This is really important. The only way out of this one for most Americans, other than the lawsuits you're filing, is making sure you show up to vote.
If you have the right to cast a mail-in ballot, utilize it. If you can do early voting, do that. If election day is your option, show up on election day.
But have a lot of ID with you.
Ali, we have the courts of law that are working, but also the court of public opinion. That's why I'll be traveling with thousands of people from all over the country, advocates, ordinary citizens, to Montgomery Saturday. This weekend, we're converging. All roads lead to the South, because at every turn in the fight for equality in our country, it has been necessary to back up the will of the courts with the expression of the American people. So I think back to where we were on January 20th, 2025, about 16 months ago, when Donald Trump began his stream of illegal actions. Our organization alone, the Democracy Defenders Fund, and our affiliate, the Democracy Defenders Action, over 300 legal matters and cases since then. We've helped wake up the country, stop his illegal actions. Hey, that's part of the reason that Donald Trump is so unpopular, more unpopular than Nixon.
Right.
So unpopular. The American people see the corruption and the costs of this. Their soaring cost crisis is not unrelated to the billions of dollars that Donald Trump and his cronies are taking out of the government.
Riddle me this. What's going on in Florida seems to be blatantly unconstitutional, against both the will of the intent of the Constitution and the will of the people who voted in a referendum. They voted in a referendum in Virginia, and they voted in an election last November. So the will of the people has been heard 2 times in the last 6 months in Virginia, and yet the intent seems to have been overthrown by the Supreme Court of Virginia.
You had a Republican-aligned majority on the Virginia Supreme Court adopt an absurd definition of Election Day, stretching it out to nullify one of the necessary steps here. So it's wrong. As we see, there is an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. But on the other hand, if we're successful in knocking out the DeSantis gerrymander, that'll more than make up for Virginia. Probably you're going to see a 2-seat Democratic pickup there anyhow. So the point is, voters should know, from the leaders down to average folks, we are fighting for them in the court of law and in the court of public opinion, whoever they may vote for.
That's
this
right.
is not a partisan battle.
You're fighting for everybody's right.
Every vote.
Yeah. That's what when you're fighting for voting rights, you're fighting for everybody to vote. Norm, great to see you. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Ali.
Norm Eisen is the co-founder of the Democracy Defenders Fund. All right, coming up, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That seems to be the unofficial motto of the Trump administration's failed retribution campaign against not one, but now 2 familiar targets. Barbara McQuaid joins us after the break. After a major setback in court last week, the Trump administration is looking for another way to pin charges on the Democratic Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posted on social media last night, quote, "Captain," in quotes, "Mark Kelly strikes again." Now he's blabbing on TV falsely and dumbly about a classified Pentagon briefing he received. Did he violate his oath again? Department of War legal counsel will review. That threat was in reference to this interview that Senator Kelly gave to CBS News on Sunday morning.
We've been tracking it. A number of times we've been briefed by the Pentagon on specific munitions. Actually, it's been pretty detailed on Tomahawks, ATACMS, SM-3s, THAAD rounds, Patriot rounds, so those interceptor rounds to defend ourselves. And the numbers are, I think it's fair to say it's shocking. How deep we have gone into these magazines. because this president got our country into this without a strategic goal, without a plan, without a timeline. And because of that, we've expended a lot of munitions. You may have seen me ask the Secretary of Defense this question about how long it's going to take to replenish. We're talking about years.
Now, note what he said there. You may have seen me ask the Secretary of Defense. This is out there. This is widely reported. I actually said it in our opening block about how the weakness that the world has realized about America is it can't replenish its munitions. Senator Kelly responded to Pete Hegseth with his own quote, his own post, quote, "We had this conversation in a public hearing a week ago, and you said it would take years to replenish some of these stockpiles." That's not classified. It's a quote from you. This war is coming at a serious cost, and you and the president still haven't explained to the American people what the goal is. Now, of course, none of this is new for an administration that's willing to go after anyone whom Donald Trump wants targeted, like the former FBI Director James Comey. The Hill reports a federal judge on Friday set a July 15th trial date for the former FBI Director James Comey on his new criminal charges of threatening President Trump. U.S. District Judge Louise Flanagan, who will oversee the trial, also agreed that Comey doesn't have to make the trek to her North Carolina courtroom on Monday to formally enter his not guilty plea. It'll take place closer to trial on June 30th. Not hiding his feelings toward James Comey, Donald Trump called him a dirty cop in a social media post over the weekend. Seemingly unfazed by this second round of bogus charges, James Comey said this on MS Now earlier today about how the Justice Department is operating under Donald Trump.
I think it's just Donald Trump continuing to move through people until he finds those who will literally do whatever he says. Maybe he's found that with Mr. Blanche, maybe not. Maybe his standards will be too high, as apparently Pam Bondi's were, which is a bit of a shock.
Was saying something?
Yeah, and so she's apparently headed for some important private sector job we haven't heard about yet. That may be Mr. Blanche's future, or maybe not, I don't know. But Donald Trump has a bottomless desire to gain revenge against those who've criticized him. And I'm not going to stop criticizing him because I think that's required if you care about America. And so it will just keep going. If he gets rid of Blanche, he'll try to find someone else. Look at the bottom of every barrel. There are still apples. And so he will find someone to do what he wants to do.
Joining us is Barbara McQuade, former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She's an MS Now legal analyst. You and I spoke, it must have been a couple of years ago, Barbara, about retribution. But as a policy that drives prosecution, can one make a case against that? Can one take what Jim Comey said to Nicole and take it to court and say, it's just chasing people down. He's just chasing perceived enemies down?
Well, it can become a basis for a violation of due process if someone can demonstrate that the prosecution is engaging in what's known as selective prosecution. That is, you have handpicked defendants and charged them for a non-legitimate law enforcement reason, and you have also at the same time declined to bring charges against other individuals who are similarly situated. Most often, those kinds of challenges fail because prosecutors enjoy a great deal of discretion, and mostly because it's impossible to find other people who have engaged in similar conduct and not been charged, right? It's like trying to find the dog that didn't bark. I think in Jim Comey's case, though, he may very well be able to demonstrate that standard because of all of the 8647 images that are available throughout Amazon and commerce and T-shirts and baseball caps and other kinds of things. So it is certainly a violation of the rule of law to engage in that. It's just often very difficult to demonstrate it.
So here's a case where this is the second time they've gone after James Comey for different things. Mark Kelly, they keep going after him again for different things. This is important. They're going after him for talking about our munition supply. Pete Hegseth is making no secret of the fact that he's trying to target Mark Kelly. Talk to me about the legality of that.
Yeah, and you know, if you were really concerned about a statement, you might investigate it. You might question them. The last thing you do is post about it on social media. So it strikes me as more of a shot across the bow, an effort to intimidate Mark Kelly into silence, and maybe more importantly, other people who might see this, people who do not feel the strength of a Mark Kelly and say, oh gosh, look, they went after Mark Kelly. I better keep my mouth shut or else they might go after me too. But, you know, Mark Kelly has shown that he is not afraid to take on this administration. He filed a First Amendment claim the first time Pete Hegseth went after him based on that video that he participated in, just providing accurate, lawful information. But you're right, Ali, in that the more times you go after the same individual, it becomes easier to demonstrate that you are going after them for an improper purpose.
Mark Kelly said to Punchbowl that the Arizona Democrat doesn't think this will be the end of the road. My expectation is we win in the circuit court, and I also expect them to probably appeal again, and it might go to the Supreme Court, Kelly told us at the Sedona Forum. No matter what he does, I'm not going away. Do you imagine this getting to the Supreme Court?
I'd be surprised. It seems like such a strong case. I suppose what I expect is the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals will affirm the lower court's opinion that said this was indeed a First Amendment violation to penalize Mark Kelly for saying things that are true and accurate statements of the law. You know, the Supreme Court only takes up cases where there is a significant legal issue or a circuit split or some unresolved constitutional interpretation. I don't think that this is that case. I think this case is really quite clear. The Circuit Court of Appeals has to take the case as a matter of right, but appeals beyond that to the Supreme Court are discretionary. And I can't imagine even the Supreme Court would want to take on this case. It's just such a clear-cut case in the favor of Mark Kelly.
Barbara, great to see you. Thank you as always. MS Now legal analyst Barbara McQuade. We'll be right back. Okay, before we go, a quick reminder that every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, you can join me on MS Now's YouTube page for It's Happening with Velshi and Rule. This week, sitting in for Steph is our friend Justin Wolfers, economics and public policy professor at the University of Michigan. We'll be taking your questions. That's tonight's last word.